And wonderful. Thank you all for joining us today. And I am thrilled to continue our conversation with Tom Szaky, the founder and CEO of TerraCycle, which you'll learn quite a lot about. I've been following the work of TerraCycle for some time. They're very involved with the World Economic Forum and other initiatives. And so thank you so much for joining us, Tom. Tom will be in conversation with our distinguished executive in residence, Erin Byrne. Erin is just a fantastic leader. She was formerly head of sustainability and social impact for Novo Nordisk US. And she's also, very much a leader in the sustainability space and that intersection of sustainability, health, and societal impact. And so leaving it to you both to have what I'm sure will be a very exciting conversation. Thank you so much.
Perfect, Noah. Thank you so much. And Tom, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. So I am very excited about this conversation. I know many of our audience members are, because your insights, your expertise, and your voice is so hugely valuable because you're a trailblazer in the sustainability world. But you also have a really strong focus on the impact of the work of sustainability on diverse communities. And I see that as evidenced by even just having your global headquarters in the heart of Trenton, New Jersey. And for many of the New Jersey people that are on today, it's can be seen very easily from driving Route 1 south through Trenton towards Pennsylvania. So Tom, let me give you a proper introduction and then we can dive into the conversation. As Noah mentioned, you are founder and CEO of TerraCycle, which is a global leader in the collection and repurposing of complex waste streams. TerraCycle operates in 21 countries, working with some of the world's largest brands, retailers, manufacturers to create national platforms to recycle products and packaging that would otherwise go in landfills. And I swear, I feel like it's every day I see a new nationally known global company announce their partnership with you. So that's really fantastic. But you've also received personally, and the company has received hundreds of social, environmental, and business awards recognizing all of your efforts from a range from the UN, the World Economic Forum, Schwab, Fortune, Time, and the US Chamber of Commerce. You're also an author, you wear many hats, of 4 books: Revolution in a Bottle, Outsmart Waste, Make Garbage Great, and The Future of Packaging. So Tom, thank you again for joining us. Why don't you just kick us off and tell us a little bit about TerraCycle, and really maybe one step before that also, why you started it, right? How did you grow this idea from fertilizer into this large social enterprise about eliminating the idea of waste?
It's a good question. So look, I mean, if we start at the very beginning, my story starts with being born in Budapest, which is in Hungary, in '82. And it's only really relevant to the story because back in the early '80s, it was still a part of the USSR, effectively under the Iron Curtain, and was communist. I have a lot of empathy for what our friends in Ukraine, which is just next door to us, are dealing with vis-a-vis, sort of the might of Russia and so on. Nevertheless, and actually sort of a coincidentally Ukrainian is Chernobyl happened in '86, and the borders destabilized just for a few days due to that nuclear meltdown. And my parents, I was 4 at the time, escaped effectively as refugees. We sought asylum in Germany, then Holland, then Belgium, and finally, 3 years later, were able to settle in Canada, which is where I effectively grew up. And then I came down to New Jersey to attend university, and that's how I've ended up here. Now, why I mention this as a geographical sort of movement is because I went from communism to capitalism, and not even just capitalism, the center of capitalism, right? And I fell in love with entrepreneurship at an early age. Started my first company when I was 14, and so on. And I look, honestly, for selfish reasons, I fell in love with it. I felt like it's the best ticket to fame and fortune, and that helps the ego, right? But I had this huge turning point. I remember this, one of the first classes at Princeton was Econ 101. And the professor, introduction to econ, gets up on stage and asks, what's the purpose of business? And the answer she was looking for is maximize profit to shareholders. And I was like, oh, that is like the least inspiring thing I could have heard. And like, I get it though, right?
And would she say the same thing today?
You know what? It's interesting. I think I've struggled with the answer because like I've had this sort of opportunity to lecture at schools, even like our conversation today for now almost 2 decades, and the answers students give has really become more inspiring, right? Like today, a person would say it's about how it impacts stakeholders and so on, right? But let's be clear, the textbooks still say maximize profit to shareholders, and that's important because that's how the majority of the companies still make decisions. It's not just that it's how it's taught. It is the God that is served. We all, kiss the feet of the God of profit. And so to me, I took this big reflection because I don't think most stakeholders that interact with the business care at all about profit to shareholders. Look, if you have a Walmart, right, with millions of employees, about as many people probably, if not more, serving in the vendor community, manufacturers and so on, from lawyers to advertisers. Then you have billions of people, Walmart serves as consumers. How many of them care at all about profit to shareholders? It's probably like 1% of 1% of 1%. So profit is important, but my point of view shifted to maybe it's an indicator of health, right? And if you're profitable, it's like being healthy. You're going to flourish and grow. And if you're not profitable, the opposite will happen and you'll go bankrupt at some point. You can't be unprofitable forever. So if that's a reasonable place for profit to be, then what's the point? And then the point is what I think we all hope it would be is how does it help make the world better? Does it help society? Does it help the environment? Does it do both? And that's what I really started getting the bug for. And so I was thinking, about this in the back of my mind, trying to find, sort of looking for business models that fit the bill. And for me, TerraCycle started as a fertilizer company because my friends were growing, it's relaxed now and nice and legal everywhere, but back 20 years ago, growing pot wasn't as much, and they were doing that in Montreal and couldn't make the plants work. And they one day started feeding organic waste to worms, taking the worm poop and feeding, or worm castings, more appropriate term, feeding it to the plants, and the plants were doing well. And I remember them inviting me up, in my freshman year, fall, so I think spring break. And this was amazing. They were taking waste and feeding it to worms and making a product. And that really got me excited about this topic of waste, because waste is this ridiculous thing that is huge, but it's also understudied. It is, think about it this way. Everything we possess, everything in your screen, everything in my screen, from our clothes to the wall to everything, will be property of a garbage company one day. Legal property, with no exception. 99% of what we buy, it'll be property of a garbage company within the year of its purchase. Only 1% of stuff we buy even goes further than 12 months. And for how big of a concept that is, it's the only industry that will own it all. It is also objectively the least innovative industry per dollar of revenue it enjoys. It is just something no one wants to deal with. It is literally out of sight, out of mind. Everything to do with waste is get rid of it. I don't want to deal with it. And that also has a talent issue around it, right? People don't want to get involved. And so it's filled with these phenomenal anomalies, and it's wonderfully purposeful to solve. And that's sort of created this lifelong fascination around innovating in this space, because you get to invent all these cool things. There's not that many people doing it, and there's this great purpose to it all at the very same time.
Yeah, no, that is so true. And I think that as consumers and just everyday, corporate citizens, you don't realize the true consequences of waste, of climate change, right? Like those of us who are engaged on this topic, participating today, are probably paying attention to what's going on in the world. And, a lot of what was discussed earlier today, the IPCC just talked about it. It's a dire situation, right? And inaction is going to be the worst thing. So I don't know, is it a lot of that people, everyday people just don't know what they don't know? What have you seen in terms of the trickle down effect of waste and climate change? And
it's a really important point you raised, because I think so there's a couple of very interesting pieces, but they're not going to be linear per se, because it's like these different sort of pieces I can share. One is that good news, right? People are measurably caring more than ever before, all over the world. Americans in specific, everywhere you're seeing, but it only started happening, and this like concern around environment, waste, climate change, species reduction, the extinction revolution, so on and so forth, Greta, everything started in late 2017, early 2018, measurably. But what's great is that has really like exploded in concern. It really has. And COVID, we were all in the movement very concerned that it would take the conversation away from environment to to safety, health, as very, very important topics. And it turned out people can preserve two concerns in their mind simultaneously, right? And if anything, COVID has even created more momentum on the environmental movement. And people thought it would do the opposite, take our eye off the ball and change the trend to something else. So that's really good news. And it's only getting more and more and more. Now, what tends to exacerbate this is bad things happening, right? So when Australia caught on fire, almost literally, Australians measurably cared more. Now, after it went away, they cared less, but they leveled out more than they started at, right? So there's these bumps and it goes down. Fukushima, same thing in Japan, or anytime that it's unfortunate that we need these huge negative stimuli to push us, but it does push us, and thank goodness that that's happening. Now, the issue though, I think there's two issues, is that environment is incredibly complicated. It's not a subtle conversation that you can just have black and white answers for, right? How many people can connect an orangutan not having habitat, to buying a bottle of shampoo, through palm oil? Yeah. And that's one, sort of example. And there's 100 other twists and turns and so on, that come out. And it's complicated, and complication creates paralysis, right? If people don't know, then it's like, okay, I'm just going to continue doing what I'm doing. Yeah. I think if you feel like that, and it's like and it's an overwhelming feeling, like, what do I do? And I don't even understand if what I'm doing is good or not. There's one central thesis I've learned on this, which is, and there's one way to really simplify it all, but it's very challenging for business to send this message, and you'll see why in a moment, but it's very easy, I think, for society to do that, which is every environmental concern in the world, whether you care about climate change or deforestation or waste, you pick the topic, or all of them, we vote for these things constantly with the one thing we do, which is the act of purchase. Mm-hmm. And there's no good purchase. Let's not kid ourselves. No matter how reusable, how vegan, how you name the monikers, there's no good purchase, right? Except the one you don't buy, perhaps. And the reason is because when you purchase, that is what creates farming, mining, transport, all the refined, everything to go into creating objects. And why we are in this sort of crisis mode is, starting in the 50s, we invented consumerism as a society, fell in love with it, and we today buy 10 times more stuff than we did just 70 years ago. And we're doing more year over year.
Yeah, so I want to get into this concept that you're talking about, right? That we buy more now. And I've heard you talk before about this idea of like disposing, right? Disposability. Yes. How has that, if you can enlighten everyone about what that is a little bit more, but how has that impacted communities historically and then today? Because I think it leads back to a lot of that consumerism and purchasing that you're talking about.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So if we think about commerce, right? We've always been buying and transacting, right? For a very, very long time as society. We've also always had outputs. Even as an animal, our outputs are the carbon dioxide we exhale, the stuff we put in the toilet, our body parts in our body at the end, right? Hair when we cut it, but then one day we pass away and there's a body there. We always have outputs, but these are outputs nature views as useful inputs for another organism, right? Trees inhale our carbon and they need it. Bacteria love our fecal matter and urine, and body parts are great food for other things. That's the great cycle and how nature does it. So the first thing to note is what's unique about, and this all came about in the 1950s, right? This is all incredibly new. What emerged really after World War II was the ability to commercialize at scale complex materials, polymers, plastics, and other things. That, by the way, it's easy to really vilify plastics, but they have done things that are phenomenal. We probably wouldn't be as healthy as we are today without plastics, right? Sure. And I know people say plastics are unhealthy with leaching, and there's an entire body of research that's really important to follow there. But most medical devices, most surgeries, and so on are based on the ability of plastic as an innovator, right? So there is this huge progression it has produced, and then that was coupled with this idea of consumerism that really came on right around that time. Right, we had stability. We just finished the war, and everything was out there, living the American dream, which was buying more and having bigger and more comfort than the generations before us. And this has really exploded numerically. It's phenomenal, and you can see it. Like, open your drawer and see how many socks you have compared to how many your grandparents had. Right, and anything has gone in. The square footage of a home has just gone through the roof, and everything has gone in that direction. And it's done so because disposability, which is the center of all this, was enabled through the complex materials and gave out virtues that we absolutely loved, which is affordability and convenience and product range. Those would be the three, I think, biggest virtues. Now, what this has done is it's divorced us from supply chains, right? So I imagine 100 years ago, if like, let's say, you were in the market for, you needed a wool sweater, right? It was just getting cold and you needed a sweater. You would probably have seen the sheep that were growing the wool and seen them grazing. You probably would have seen the person who took the wool and made it into yarn and seen someone knitting it. And that sweater probably would have cost equivalent to salary, a very large amount of your hours spent at a job, right? Today, because of the scale we do this at, and because of this industrialization, the sweater costs next to nothing compared to how many hours we work. We could probably buy a sweater for 10 minutes of work, or depending on our salary, or at minimum in hours of work, we get a sweater. When, 100 years ago, it may have been a month of work to get that same thing. So we don't appreciate it as much. We don't understand it because the supply chains are global now, and we don't see the sheep and the whole thing happening. And we love, and get high stimuli about buying things. And so if we're going to combat this, I think the first thing we have to really understand is that we vote for this every day when we buy things. It's not consumer product companies trying to convince us to buy what we don't want to buy. That's epically difficult. Consumer product companies, I'm sure, I can working in one, need to figure out what are the need states and get us what we need in the most exciting, affordable, and convenient way possible. And maybe the real genius marketers figure out how to get us what we don't yet know we want, but when we see it, we want it, right? That's about as like great it can be. But we vote for this by purchase. And I think that's the first thing that we, should realize is what we buy, more will appear of tomorrow, and what we don't buy, less will. Not buying is an active vote as well. It's not just what we buy. That gives us a lot of power, right? To understand how to control this. And then what we buy, let's think about how do we buy things that are better, more circular, care for the environment more, but we have to volume down. There's no solution. Nothing like our company does or anyone in sustainability and commerce can do will make the huge amount of consumption we do okay. And this is difficult to share in any commercial context, right? Like companies, how could they put out a message, saying don't buy? Even the companies who have put out don't buy me messages, those programs are celebrated for how much more purchasing they produce, ironically.
That's fascinating. So do you see there's a difference between purchasing and or waste and or recycling amongst different socioeconomic communities? How does that all vary?
Yeah, so and sorry, you did ask, and it's like, this is a really important piece, is that as we have done this, right, waste and recycling is you can really see it. What countries have good recycling are the rich countries. What countries have poor recycling? Of course, the poorer, but they also get exacerbated because they're also where the rich countries dump their waste. So it's like it's like a double effect, right? And so we have to note that this idea of recycling and circular economy is a privilege, right? It's a concept of privilege. And the way to think about this, what makes something recyclable is not, I think, what people think. My hypothesis is that citizens think, the average sort of public think that what can be recycled is what's recycled. Like that what I put in my blue box, whatever color it may be, but let's say it's blue, what I put in is technically can be recycled. That's why we put it in the blue box. And what I put in the trash is what is not designed to be recyclable or cannot be recycled. I believe that's what, as consumer insight studies show that that's what people think in general. The industry talks about the R&D, the construction of a package, and then the available infrastructure to do the work. That's sort of what I see in all these stakeholder groups where it's consumer product companies and retailers. And I would argue it's all of those have glimmers, sort of like kernels of truth, but the real center question is one thing and one thing only. Can a garbage company make money? Like we started our conversation by everyone serving the god of profit. Well, so do garbage companies. They're all for-profit enterprises. They are going to collect and recycle what they can make money on, and they will dispose what they can't make money on. It's sort of like if you and I were walking down the street and I was walking in front of you and I dropped a bar of gold, you'd probably happily pick it up with a smile, right? If I dropped, sorry for the crudeness, a bag of shit, you would avoid it and someone would have to be paid to get rid of it. And that's waste management, right? The aluminum can is the proverbial bar of gold, that is so valuable. You don't have to pay anyone. Someone's going to want to collect it because the aluminum is valuable enough. But 80% of objects in the world cost more to collect and recycle than the results are worth and become non-recyclable. And to your question, if you look at emerging countries, as you go into Central America, Asia Pacific, Northern Africa, these places, the stuff that is purchased there is even lower value than stuff we purchase here. Like a shampoo, here we buy in bottles that are recyclable in blue bin settings because the value of those plastics are big enough to fund the collection and processing. But if you lived in, Cambodia or Honduras or wherever, the shampoo is going to come in a sachet. And that's a lower value object. And so no one's going to bother recycling those because there's not enough value in them. So this whole issue is even exacerbated as you go to locations that don't have wealth. Both the systems are not there, they're not funded, but then also what garbage is being produced is of lower quality, lower potential to be profitable for recyclers.
Is there a mindset that plays a role in this as well? We heard earlier that, there needs to be this huge mindset shift, right? Do we as consumers need to do that as well? I mean, I'm assuming we do with the consumerism, right, and purchasing. Yes. But what about, I will tell you, my kids, right, I have 3 kids, and they get does it go in the front or does it go in the back, right? And they get the basics like you were just talking about, but it also admittedly is confusing, right? It can be confusing. I don't know, this looks plastic, but does it have a little triangle on it? So there might be 2 questions in here. One about just the mindset of wanting to help the environment, but 2, talk to me, educate me a little bit more on the complex nature of recycling in there of itself and how that may impact different communities.
Absolutely. So this is one of the big challenges in recycling is it is very complicated and differs zip code by zip code by zip code. Because how did garbage companies come to be is these are small companies, sort of mom and pop companies, one emerged in town A, another garbage company emerged in town B. And they first just emerged as waste companies, take the material and put it in a landfill. That's it, like transportation from your home to a landfill. Then I think it was around the 70s, recycling came onto the scene. And each of these companies, little tiny companies, approached it differently. And for each of them, what they can make money on is different. It's different because of where they are physically located, right? If they're located in an area far from a market, less things will be profitable for them to recycle because they have transportation distances. If they're close to a market or close to a port, maybe more. Also depends on what the population consumes. Are they consuming more glass or aluminum cans? It also matters what is the density. There's all these differences. And so what they could recycle, and also that depends on what equipment they invested in, right? What sorting facilities. So every town has a different, garbage system. Now, even though today you look at these big companies like Republic, Waste Management, these large companies, they got created by buying all these little companies. And so there's not standards, right? Even with the large, banners, they are just roll-ups of all these independent companies, which means the capabilities are different on a municipality level. And it may also even depend on how much money the municipality has put in from tax dollars, right? Like, for example, City of Philadelphia is really struggling right now with funding recycling. So the capability of recycling in Philly is going to be decreasing, and already has. So what you can put in your blue bin goes down. Now, that's because of the nature of this fragmentation. Right, so it's really important to check with your, recycler what is recyclable, and please note it may be different when you move to another area. What drives it though is this profitability. So that's all complicated, and it's like a headache to even try to get one's head around. And so what can we do? I think the very first thing, the best thing is reduce purchase. Right, I can't reemphasize this enough. Don't buy it if possible. Do you really need it? Right, and there's certain things certainly we need like food. But there's a lot of food available. If you go in the fresh fruits and vegetables section that has no packaging, and you don't have to put it in those bags. Usually when I go shopping, I just go into the, from the lettuce to the whatever the apples, fill up the cart with just loose fresh fruits and vegetables, and that's it, right? So there's ways to do that, but the first is ideally, don't buy, because there's nothing better than that. Then the next one is, can you look at, can you do things that are reusable? Buy, if it's hard goods like clothing, buy secondhand. If it's consumables, see if you can access reusables if they are in your community. Like we have a big, this Loop division is a whole thing around reuse. Then from there, it's local recycling. Is that available? And local recycling, simply speaking, it's going to be for paper, aluminum, clear PET, which is the plastic of a soda bottle, and light colored HDPE, which is the plastic of like a laundry detergent jug. And typically that's it. Even if your community says, put it in plastics number 1 through 7, which are plastic identifiers, they're typically only actually recycling ones and twos.
So then they are disposing it.
They're throwing it out the other end. Yeah. About 40% of what we put in our recycling bin is not valorized and it's undesirable and it goes out the other end. There was this big trend in the US of what's called like single stream recycling. Throw everything in the bin. And that's why many recyclers say, put number 1 through 7, which are all the plastic types, but take it as a joke. Number 7, and that's, by the way, when I say plastic types, here's a bottle. So you see here in the bottle, there is that thing that looks like a recycling logo and a number. That doesn't mean recycling. It's called a PIC code, plastic identification code, and inside it is a number. This one has the number 1. I don't know how clear it's coming through, and the word PET underneath. That means this is PET. Number 2 is HDPE. It's a different type of plastic. Number 3 is PVC, right? And so on. Number 7 means we don't know what it is. Unidentified. Right. So you see, and that's one of these things that there is confusion. Some of it is perpetuated by the industry, right? Because the industry wants you to think that's a recycling logo, right? Makes you feel better about the product, even if it isn't. But what they're going to actually collect and recycle is going to be typically those number 1s and 2s. So feed the garbage system what it wants. The garbage system is not responsible to you. You are responsible to it. It's a very different point of view. And I think we have an inverted perception of that, right? We need to feed recyclers what they want, not expect them to recycle what they don't want, right? And then from there, use, like if products are available through other recycling methods, like what TerraCycle does or other organizations, and then try to avoid anything that has no solution. That would be sort of the way to think about the hierarchy.
Yeah, no, that's really good. First of all, education. So thank you for that and really good information. So you talked about the municipality and the town of Philadelphia and what they're struggling with, but does TerraCycle and are you working with local governments, either within the US or abroad, and how? And also, is there legislation? We were talking at one point yesterday a little bit in our health equity panel just about the power of writing and being an advocate for what you believe in to your local representative. So is there, a piece of legislation that you can inform everyone to support?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to start backward because let me start with the legislation bit. Because of this awakening of citizens, really in late 17, early 18, the amount of exciting circular economy legislation coming up all over the world is phenomenal. Now, what type of legislation is out there, right? One type of legislation are banning things. We've seen bans in straws, bans on bags, right? Anything from Ireland all the way to Seattle, banning. And banning is good because it deletes that object from its existence, but it does much more on that on the message it sends. Imagine when like Seattle bans a straw, what the folks at like Coke and Pepsi are saying internally when a straw is like a part of their ecosystem, right? So they're like, oh goodness, what's next, right? How do I get ahead of this? Because corporations' goal is to be ahead of the legislation. Ideally, so the legislation never needs to exist because the corporation is self-regulated, but that's a much more comfortable place for corporations to be than to be regulated, right? Corporations prefer always to be in an unregulated environment as it pertains to these topics, and they do that by getting ahead of it. So bans are one type, and there's more and more of those coming. They tend to come on sort of like a regional basis. Very hard to do that federally. The next area is what's called EPR, Extended Product Responsibility legislation. And Maine was the first state in the US finally to pass EPR, and there's other states that are coming, we believe, very, very soon. EPR, again, Extended Product Responsibility, creates a tax on packaging that you produce. So the producer, every time you make a package, you pay a fee into this EPR fund, and that money is used to boost recycling. So what EPR's effect is it creates a money flow. And this entire issue of recycling is around money flows. So in countries like Germany, who have had EPR for decades, in Germany it's called the Grünepunkt, the recycling rate for the things that are profitable to recycle explodes. So like aluminum can recycling in Germany is above 90%. It's incredibly high. PET recycling also incredibly high because it's boosted by this flow of money. But important to note, EPR is not a silver bullet because it's usually not enough money to fund the recycling, the things that are not profitable to recycle. So take juice pouches. Juice pouches pay their EPR fee in Germany, but they're all incinerated because there's not enough value in them to bother recycling them. Again, it's about the value in the waste, right? Is the key question. There's also legislation called DRS, deposit return schemes. Here in the US, we call them bottle bills. And that produces a deposit on a package, which you get back when you drop it off in a recycling center, typically at a retailer. That always increases the rate of recycling. Now, these are the types of legislation vis-a-vis money flows. There's also legislations around restricting ability to claim claims, right? And a really good example of that is this really exciting legislation in California called SB 343. This just got signed into law. And there's other states now that are also looking at similar legislation to the Senate Bill 343. And basically what it says is, historically, if you were a brand in the United States and you wanted to put that triangle logo like on the package saying, please recycle me. I'm just looking around to see if I can put one up. Oh, here we go. Here's one. So here's a package and you can see right there, recycling logo, right?
Yeah.
Okay. To put that logo on, historically in the US, you had to show access. That's what the FTC governed. And access meant that 60% or more Americans have to be able to have a recycling program near them that collects that material. And then you can put, it's recyclable. SB 343 does something very smart where it says, the government, in this case, the state of California, has to agree that it's also actually being recycled on the other end. And what this legislation is going to do, and it's going to go into effect January of 24, is probably about a third of all objects that have a recycling logo on them today will not be able to carry it after that bill. Like any polypropylene container, like a yogurt cup or a margarine container, will no longer be able to say recyclable because it's collected, but then not recycled, right? Because there's not the economic pull on it. Things like Tetra Pak will be a good question, you know, and so on. Things like soda bottles will be fine, but 2/3 of goods will remove that label. Now, why that's good legislation is it will hopefully incentivize producers to change their designs and design into what will get them the label, because they want to be able to claim recyclable. In fact, recyclable is typically the #1 sustainability virtue that consumers look for first. That's by far the first, and then everything comes second from that.
So are you seeing more businesses innovate in a way that's, again, getting to your point of like corporations needing to be ahead of, you know, expecting, you know, always kind of looking around the corner, right? And expecting what's next. Are you seeing more and more of them innovate in this way, in an authentic way too?
It's a good question. So first, I would say it's very interesting to see how corporations view sustainability, which really emerged as a function in the past 2 decades, right? The idea of a chief sustainability officer, or even the idea of CSR, that's about a 20-year-old concept, and it's still, you know, coming on. And the best way to tell, by the way, how a company views this topic is where the function is housed in the organization. Sometimes chief sustainability officers are a part of the legal department, or in some companies, they are the general counsel. The CSO and the general counsel is the same person. I would argue that if that's the case, that means they view it as a risk to be managed, because usually legal manages risks, right? So legislative risk or some form of compliance risk. It could be under communications, which means they view sustainability as a communication opportunity. You know, it's really interesting where it sits, and does it have power as well, right? Like, does it have a budget? Does it have the ability to say no to things and force rules? That's how you're going to be able to tell. And if you're going to work at a company and you want to know how serious they are about sustainability, ask, where does do they have a chief sustainability officer, and where do they sit? In what department are they housed, right? And how much budget and control are they given? That's a really good telling sign. Now, what I would say is that, again, because of the consumer sentiment rising so aggressively, every company is aware that this is a risk. Minimum, everyone sees the stick coming. Legislation's coming. Consumers are more engaged in this. So, you know, everyone sees it that way. To me, the exciting companies are the ones who don't just see that, but see it as an opportunity to win and lean in on changing their models to be more circular, right? You know, that's as simply as, you know, and this is how we at TerraCycle work with companies. First, let's, you know, make sure that your stuff can be collected and recycled. Then let's help you make it from recycled content. Then let's help you shift it from disposable to reusable. So change the ownership context on it. And for each one of these steps are progressively more difficult to execute, right? Like, you can set up a recycling program relatively quickly. To change into recycled content may take a year, because you have to do stability testing and see how your product interacts with that content. And then to move from disposable to reusable may take 2 years of development, right? And so that tends to be, at least in the circular economy, the journey. And the more the companies see opportunity in this, the more they're going to lean in. And the more they don't, the more they're going to just look at checking boxes and managing against risk.
Yeah. Do you ever say no to a company who might want to come to you and say, you know what, we want to set up one of the the free mail-in products to help recycle it because we want your logo on our package, right? And we think that's going to help us sell more to our target audience.
It's, we really debated this early in our history, really debated this, like, should we have an opinion on the companies we work with, right?
Yeah.
And should we say no to some and yes to some and choose? And I don't know if there's a right answer, but the answer we landed on is we do not make an opinion on the company as long as it is a legal company, right? We wouldn't ever work with something that is illegal. But to be fair, we work with, big pharma, tobacco, big oil, you name them, right? Everything. And we decided that that's the right answer because we're here to serve recycling. And if anyone wants to shift their industry, whether it's recycling a cigarette butt or a blister pack or an oil container, and they're going to put their money there, let's be available to enable that. And in the end, every product has negatives. Now, cigarettes have like very high, obvious negatives, right? But can you argue that a cup of yogurt is benevolent? I couldn't. Methane is one of the biggest contributors to climate change, right? I don't know how the cows were treated. I could go on, and there's every product has these sort of conversations around them. There is no good product in the end, right? And so that's how we landed. And I think it was the right decision because we really say we're about it for everyone. Now, how you then communicate our programs and so on has rules against it, right? So you have to be honest in how you communicate and express, if your program has a certain scale to it or not. So it's not just that you can like do something a little small and then put our logo on it and do it. You have to, there's certain sort of checks and balances, but we don't make an opinion, as you walk in the front door, right? Everyone is welcome as long as it's around solving for waste and elevating the concept of waste.
Yeah, no, that's a really interesting answer. And I think it's a good answer because even getting back to your comment, which I found was really fascinating and interesting for those who are trying to get into the sustainability and social impact world about where it sits. And I think that is a conversation many of us have had over and over again is where is the right home for it, right? And getting back to your notion of not wanting to say no, you wanting to help. I think you can combine those thoughts in that when a company may start on their journey, they have to start somewhere, right? And they're not going to be able to wave the magic wand and have a chief sustainability officer, set up anchored into the C-suite and all the resources with budget and the dedication and the buy-in from all the shareholders, right? So they have to start somewhere. So while I think I agree with you on all those points, in some of the greenwashing discussions I've been a part of, it's like, well, how hard, they're starting, right? They're starting these programs and whether they're greenwashing or not, they are helping keep things out of the landfill, right?
I think you raised an incredibly important point because I've been in conversations inside, and by the way, just to sort of mention the budget, I mean, we're talking about companies that can even afford a CSO.
Yeah.
There is so many medium and small businesses, like your local pizza shop, that's not even ever going to enter the frame of thought, right? You have to be a pizza conglomerate to even think about that, right? And we have to be for everyone, not just in what domain they're serving, but also what scale they are, small business, medium business, large business. I think to the point on greenwashing is such an important one because in this sort of tipping point that I've seen come out in like late 17, early 18, the term greenwashing started getting thrown out against everything. And I've been in meetings where, the decision maker comes in a big corporation says, guys, we're not going to do anything because with how big we are, no matter what we do is going to start small. And because it's going to start small, all the people are going to accuse us of greenwashing. So fuck it. We're not going to do anything. And that's like, I sit in these meetings and it's like horrible because every step is a first step, right? No matter how big, a tree is, it starts as a seed, right? I mean, metaphors we can put against it, but everything starts small. And I think we need to be very appropriate with how we use the word greenwashing because it can really undermine action, right? And so to me, greenwashing is when you lie, right? So, the VW example, right? That's an example, and it's in the textbooks as an example of greenwashing, right? If you say an untruth, like if you say, I have this much, recycled content in my package, but you don't, or, I am cheating my emissions, or I took out I say doesn't contain this anymore, but it never had to begin with. When it's manipulative, when it's immoral, when it is, when it is fundamentally ethically challenged, But a big company doing a pilot and making it clear that it's a pilot, and this is what it is, it's not greenwashing, it's doing a pilot. And we shouldn't call it that, because that company, the message will be, why bother?
Yeah.
And that's dangerous, right? We need to use the term, we need to use it. It's not to say don't use it, but use it highly appropriately, because right now it's just being flung around like crazy on everything. And it almost has become synonymous with, I'm going to call something greenwashing if it's not perfect in my eyes.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the notion of, we're not going to do anything, at least for the publicly traded companies, we know that's not going to be much of an option with the SEC looking to mandate, the disclosures, which I think so many in the ESG world is, have been waiting for, right? So from your perspective, what do you think about that? And how do you think that's going to help move the needle?
I think it's phenomenal, right? So the idea, like one of the biggest issues in commerce right now, especially in the service of the God of profit, right? If that's, sort of the one deity that like capitalism serves, is that one of the outcomes of that has been avoiding to pay for externalities. And if we talk in any sustainability discussion, the big thing that is missing in capitalism is we don't pay for our externalities. We don't pay for the bill in full of the strain we put on the earth, and in production of goods, in the waste that goods generate, right? And there's this great ability to avoid those from existing, and that's the entire problem. Now, why we don't like paying for externalities is if we suddenly started paying for all the externalities of all the products, I bet you the price of goods would go up by an order of magnitude. Yeah. Because the real price of a t-shirt is not $1.99. That's the price that was incurred, but all the harm and everything it produced is not accounted for in that really tiny price if it's like a fast fashion t-shirt. And the more that can be embedded, the better. Now, the first step of that is reporting on it, right? So people can see transparently which companies are doing, this voluntarily, which aren't. That's going to really help move the needle. And the more and more of this we can do, I know there's a lot of debate around, carbon credits, but it's a really good step in the right direction. Right? It may not be perfect, and there may be ways to manipulate it, but it's a really good step in the right direction, because suddenly you are embedding that externality, even if it's imperfect. Plastic credits are the ones coming next, right? They are even more embryonic than carbon credits, but that's another great example of the companies trying to get to plastic neutrality may only be able to do so much themselves and may need to go purchase offsets, just like in carbon we can purchase offsets. It may not be perfect, but it's again a really good step in embedding externalities. And I think this is that important part overall is, look, it doesn't matter, like all these studies and reports show that, what do we have, like 5, 10, 15 years before tipping points start occurring, whether on the Amazon that was most recently, I think 10 years or we're very near a tipping point on the Amazon to turn into a desert, climate change tipping points. We're talking not that long. 5, 10 years is like snap a finger and there we are. I don't believe that there is. So if we agree that we are in crisis, which means there isn't time, all that should be focused on is action. And action, imperfect action is better than perfect no action. And I think we need to encourage constantly action, of organizations. And in action, you're going to make mistakes. So you have to be able to make those in a way that you can recover and stand back up and keep learning from that and continue, right? And I think this is really important in how we hold companies responsible. And then the action we need to do is we need to open our eyes and realize that as people, we are voting for all of this by funding it through our wallets. And not to feel, like so many times I hear consumers say, what can I do? And it's big companies manipulating me all the time. I mean, maybe there is, companies are trying to seduce you, not manipulate you, probably seduce you into their idea, but you're the one going there, right? And if you stop, that company will stop existing. And, a different thing will pop up, learning why the first company failed and trying to seduce you again in a different way. It's why carbonated beverage sales are going down. It's why, people are smoking less combustible cigarettes and more, electronic. And I can go, it's why the electric cars will take over very soon. It's why vegan, plant-based proteins are really kicking butt. It's, but we are the ones who vote for that. I mean, it's, to me, the most democratic action we take, because it's not linked to age, it's not linked to nationality, it's not linked to if we've been incarcerated, is the act of buying, right? But it's also not buying is just as powerful, right? That is what we also then have to wake up to, because we can't then talk about all this and then go out and buy things that continue to vote for destruction, and then and then not be happy with the outcome.
No, it's really important. And you bring so many things to light there. I do want to jump just really quickly to the TerraCycle Foundation. You mentioned earlier about, how we used to ship all of our recyclables overseas and the stress that it's putting on those communities. And I know you guys are working very specific in those areas. Can you just tell the audience what the TerraCycle is doing and how it's really also, how it's helping the health of the community as well?
Absolutely. So we started the TerraCycle Foundation about 2 years ago. We got some quite generous funding from the Pepsi Foundation, Coca-Cola Foundation, Benioff's Foundation, who's the guy who runs Salesforce. That just gives you a sense of what's the money behind it, right? Yeah. And TerraCycle, of course, funds it as well. But those are like the transparent funding sources. And what we are focused on with the foundation is trying to do the type of work TerraCycle does, which, again, to be fair, we're in 20 countries, but they're all developed countries. Countries like the United States or Japan or Western Europe, but not Eastern Europe, right? And where I'm from, we can't yet get the models working there because sustainability is a luxury. It is a domain of where you've already paid for your roads and you've paid for safety and education and all these other important things. Then you have the luxury to think about these pieces. Now, so the foundation's work, it's a registered public charity in the United States, and its active operations are in Thailand. So we have offices in Bangkok, and it focuses on stopping leakage. And leakage is just a very fancy way of saying litter. Now, it's not to say that people in Thailand are like littering or are more litterful per se than Americans. It's that there's no waste management infrastructure. So if you live in Thailand, let's say in Bangkok, and you live in like on one of the canals, there is no garbage truck coming. You may put your garbage on the street somewhere because there's no other choice. Then it rains. And rain washes it into the canals, into the rivers, and to the oceans, which is why today most of the ocean plastic comes from that region of the world. Now, mind you, as a side note, up until I think 1978, New York City used to dump 100% of its garbage in the ocean. So let's not, you know what I mean? Like, it just happens that stopped. But until 40 years ago, all of Manhattan's waste went 10 miles out into the ocean, literally in big barges, just thrown over. Right. Wow. So that has stopped. And now, it's coming more from this other area. So what we do is first education. I'm trying to educate people on how to avoid waste, because avoidance is more important than cleanup. And then we've deployed a number of river traps in the canals in Bangkok. And last year alone, very proudly, we pulled 1 million pounds of canal waste out of the canals. And you get the things you would expect, soda bottles and styrofoam. But I mean, it's one bicycle motorbike helmet every 2 hours. It is a mattress every 6 hours. It's all sorts of stuff, right? It's not just the packaging. And so our goal with the foundation is to effectively try to do, this type of work, but in emerging markets. And we felt that the right model to do it in is in a nonprofit lens. And look, there's not really a difference between how a company functions if it's for-profit or nonprofit. You can have benevolent for-profits. We think we're one of those. You could have benevolent nonprofits. You can also have pretty horrendous nonprofits, right? Like what we witnessed with, say, Trump's charities, right? Just to name a very sort of public example. And you could have very uncool for-profits, right? So it's an incorporation structure. And what nonprofit incorporation structure allows is access of foundation dollars. And that was the reason to incorporate it that way, is to be able to access philanthropical dollars that are interested in deploying capital against these solutions. Because again, circular economy is a money flow question, right? Without the money flow, nothing matters. There needs to be some form of money flow occurring. And if the value of the material that you're collecting is so low, it's not worth picking it up, then you need an outside money flow to enable that engine to work. But you need gasoline in the engine, and the gasoline is money, right? To be able to let it go around. In developed countries, in many cases, the money is embedded into the package. Like the aluminum is valuable enough to self-fund its cleanup. I always say, if you want to have 100% recycling rates, make every product out of solid gold, and you could happily litter them. It's just you would never afford anything either, But yeah. That metaphor hopefully helps in this concept of what really drives recyclability overall.
Yeah, so it's really helping them stop the leakage, right? But also the cleanup, because they're using that water for everything, right? Bathing to cooking,
yes,
and the health impacts on that as well.
Yeah, and before 40, 50 years ago, you could swim in those canals. Today, they would be, some of the canals, equivalent in health status to open sewage.
Oh,
And
yeah.
it's really tough because it's there's many people who live on the canals, fish out of the canals, swim in them and so on, and there is no choice. And so, at least in a very small way, this is what we're focusing on. And our job now, as the job of any foundation, is to try to get as much interest in it and people funding it. So we do everything from selling bracelets. Like, these bracelets are made from the waste from Thailand, coming from the foundation. So you can go to TerraCycle, I'll give a little plug, TerraCycleFoundation.org, and buy a bracelet. A $20 purchase pulls, I think, 30 pounds of waste out of the canals, because it all goes directly to do that. So we're trying to raise vendors frisbees as well, if that's of interest. So that'll be my one plug. But nevertheless, that allows for some funding flow, and then we're out there talking to organizations and to fund it as well. Like we've had with the PepsiCo Foundation, and then followed by the Coke Foundation.
Yeah, no, great. Well, thank you for all the work that you're doing there, because it's critically needed. I do see a couple questions just here in the chat, and I know we're rounding down here on time. Somebody said companies have been doing a lot to advance their own ESG goals, manufacturing, packaging, employees, etc. Should they be extending their scope to enabling broader populations, those outside their walls?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think first and foremost, the order should be, let's get our shops internally sorted. But then, yes, I mean, businesses should be a force for good. And I don't think there's one right answer here, because there's so many topics out there to fight against, whether it's discrimination, inclusion. Those are social questions. It could be environmental questions. It could be so many. I'll give you some examples, at least what we've tried and what the benefits have been. You mentioned at the beginning in your generous introduction around that we're in Trenton, and I'm proudly speaking to you from Trenton, New Jersey. And to be honest, I found Trenton because it was the closest location to Princeton where I could afford a building. That's how it happened, honestly. It was looking for cheap real estate. But since being here now for almost 20 years, I've opened my eyes to how phenomenal, objectively phenomenal it is to be headquartered in the inner city. And forget caring, okay? I mean, let's even take all that out. Just objectively phenomenal. So take Trenton, right? Pitch on Trenton. Best location in New Jersey. We have team members who live in Manhattan and commute here every day. We have team members from Philly. So look at the radius. You get Manhattan to Philly and a huge radius around, massive amount of talent. One. Two, the real estate prices can't be beat. You buy in Trenton for the price you rent for a year outside Trenton. That's the ratio. So you can rent a building in outside Trenton, anywhere in New Jersey for the same price, you buy it here and own it. The city wants you. So, and that's really important, right? Here, the government officials, like the mayor, comes through all the time. We have each other on cell phone. I would never have that type of access and support from the mayor if I was in San Francisco or Manhattan or Chicago. It just wouldn't happen, right? And they're not just access, but wanting you to succeed, helping and so on, right? Like, that's hugely beneficial to embryonic businesses. And then the community wants you and helps you, and it's incredibly purposeful. So for example, you may see some graffiti in the backdrop here, but the outside of our building, because graffiti or street writing is a very common art form here, but it's very difficult if you are an artist practicing this form to find legal spaces to paint. So what do? You go at 2 a.m, you're painting something that's illegal, so you're always looking at this over the side of your shoulder. Maybe the person where you painted it isn't even happy that it got put there. It's all this stress. So we said, come paint our walls anytime. And on the outside of our building, it looks like these images on the inside, but is repainted every 2 weeks, top to bottom, a big headquarter building.
Every 2 weeks?
Every 2 weeks, it's brand new. I mean, it's that thick, it's about an inch of latex spray paint. Here's the beautiful part. I don't do anything. I don't provide paint. I don't do anything. And yet we get thanked in the process. And this is the power of purpose, right? Is that purpose begets, it attracts team members to join. We have a huge one. I mean, we're about 600 employees. By the way, fun, it's unlike any garbage company, majority female by staff, both in leadership and in the ranks. And purpose attracts, it retains. It opens doors like you wouldn't believe, right? And so it's objectively brilliant to be doing, it helps the bottom line to be located in their cities. It's cheaper, it's great. But then the purpose, which you don't see on your P&L, is incredibly valuable to the business's success and growth, right? And how we like value brands, and there's a value brands tab and we steward that value. I think purpose is just as important. right? And it produces objective value. People are looking now more for what the job is than what it pays, right? In 70 years ago, like in the 50s, it was, what do you pay me? Oh, and then by the way, what do I have to do? Now it's, what does it do? Do I feel good about that? Am I feeling fulfilled? And by the way, what does it pay relative to, is it going to, am I going to be able to maintain my standard of living? And that's completely inverted. And this is so important. And I think doing these sort of things reinforces that and helps. And it just doesn't, there's no downside, honestly.
Yeah, no, that's really fantastic. And I think that notion of aligning purpose and profit is one of the key pillars of the Rutgers Institute for Corporate Social Innovation. Yes. So that was a nice segue. So thank you for that.
Well, purpose begets profit and secures it, right? If we would agree that profit is critically important, I never would sit here and say profit isn't important. It's like having a heartbeat. It's like breathing. But we don't live to breathe. We breathe to live.
Yeah.
And, I think simplified, right? The question is, what is our role? And it's probably, how do we leave the world? How do we contribute to it? Is the world happy we existed? Or is it happy that we die? And like, thank God this person's gone, right? And I think if that's the case, I think companies can, are organisms, right? And they, that is very, very similar. If you are profitable, you will be here and flourish. And if you are purposeful, everyone will want you to exist and will help you. And you will grow big and grow and live for a very long time. But if you're the opposite pressures are at play.
Yeah, no, that's really great. Tom, thank you so very much. And for everyone, Tom and TerraCycle has a whole variety of different types of services, from free services to now TerraCycle at home. So there's a little something for everybody. And I can guarantee you probably have something that you'd be able to mail back in their free programs and divert some waste. So Tom, thank you so much for spending this time with us. Really enlightening conversation. So thank you again.
It's entirely my pleasure. Thank you. And thank you to everyone who joined today.
Thank you so much, Tom and Erin. It was wonderful to have this very vibrant conversation, and I certainly learned a lot about what I can and cannot recycle and thinking about purpose in a different way. So thank you both. I will encourage everyone at this session to join us for the next session, which is focusing on women of color driving impact in the workplace. Thank you so much.
Great. Thanks again, Tom.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thanks, Erin. Bye. Thanks, Emma.